Hello and welcome to the Brooklyn Rails Common Ground. I'm Malva Kachali, Special Projects Associate here at the Rail, and today I'm thrilled to be welcoming you to the second episode of our new monthly series, Publishing in Transit, featuring our friends and comrades over at Tender Buttons Press. Hi, everyone. The series will feature monthly deep dives behind the scenes of literary publishing, featuring editors and writers of different presses. And today we're so thrilled to have the pleasure of welcoming poet and founding editor of Tender Buttons Press, Leanne Brown, alongside two of her authors, Anne Waldman and Lucia Hinojosa Gaxiola, in conversation with the wonderful and formidable Cole Swensen. Finally, we've started out all of our events here with two important acknowledgements. The first is that here in New York, we're on Lenape Hoking, the unceded land and waters of the Wappinger, Canarsie, Munsee, and Lenni Lenape people of the Delaware Nation and the Shinnecock Indian Nation. The second is an acknowledgement that Black Lives Matter. And I think it's worth remembering that the heart of both of these acknowledgements is a commitment to the liberation of the oppressed and solidarity for all those who struggle in freedom, for freedom. In that spirit, I encourage you all to check out the chat, where I'll drop a living document of resources and actions that we've been putting together behind the scenes at the Rail. If you have any suggestions for content to add, send that our way as well. But now we'll get right into it. It's my honor to welcome our wonderful guests of this afternoon. First up is poet, book publisher, and founding editor of Tender Buttons, Leanne Brown. She's the author of Other Archer, In the Laurels, Caught, and many others. She founded this press, which is dedicated to publishing experimental women's poetry and much more, and has taught at universities widely. She's joined today by interdisciplinary artist and writer Lucia Hinojosa Gaxiola, who works in the medium of ephemeral gestures, and I'm so excited to hear more about that. Lucia is the artistic director of Disonare, an experimental editorial project located in Mexico City. Next up is poet Anne Waldman, internationally recognized and acclaimed. She's been an active member of the Outrider experimental poetry community, a culture that she's helped nurture for over 4 decades as a writer, editor, teacher, performer, magpie scholar, infrastructural curator, and political activist. And last but not least, this wonderful panel of phenomenal people are joined by the curator of this series, poet Cole Swensen, who is the author of 17 volumes of poetry, 1 collection of critical essays, and a book of hybrid poem essays titled Art in Time, which came out with Nightboat just last month. A former Guggenheim Fellow, Cole has been a finalist for the National Book Award and received the Iowa Poetry Prize and the National Poetry Series Prize, among many others. She's translated over 20 volumes of poetry, prose, and art crit from French, and here she is with us all to translate the secrets of publishing for us today. So Cole, take it away.
Thank you so much. And thank you all for coming, and thank you to the Rail and everyone involved who's brought this thing together and made it work. You introduced the series pretty well, so I'm just going to say we're here to celebrate editors of literary presses who so often do all that work behind the scenes and maybe don't get enough acknowledgement. So this is our opportunity to do that. It's once a month. It will normally be the second Thursday of every month at 1 p.m. Eastern Standard or Eastern Daylight Time. This is an unusual month. We're doing the first Thursday, but from now on, it'll be the second. And on the 12th of August, we'll be hearing from New Directions Press. And on the 9th of September, we'll be hearing from Ugly Duckling Press. So please do come and join us for that. And now I'd like to just make sure that everyone's voice gets into the room so that we get to know who we'll be hearing from. And I thought I'd love to hear where everyone is. I think with this format, it's great that we can literally get an international group together. That's fantastic. But it's also nice to ground again and remember that we all are somewhere specific on the planet. So let's start with Leanne. If you would just tell us where you are. It looks like the weather's great. What's it like there? Oops, you're muted.
Leanne, I'm inviting you.
Super humid. I'm on the porch looking out over the French Broad River, which is purportedly the 3rd oldest river in the world. I'm in the Appalachians in North Carolina, and sacred Cherokee land. And the rain just fell, so the birds are out swooping me on the porch eating the birdseed I put out.
Great, we can picture it. That's wonderful. Anne, where are you? Tell us about it. Oops, you're muted. You're muted.
I'm on the spine of the North American continent, close to the Continental Divide in Boulder, Colorado, unceded territory of the Ute, Arapaho and Cheyenne peoples. And there are Ute communities very active nearby, just to let people know. And the governor here, Polis, has been very generous and activated a lot of interesting projects around some of those communities. And that's very exciting. So yes, the weather's a little cooler. We're in week 3 of our Carrier Waves, Jack Kerouac School of Disembodied Poetics program. So kind of being attentive to that. It's been a wonderful series. I'm very happy to see you all. This is terrific that you're honoring small press and radical publishing and such an important field.
Thank you. And Lucia, tell us where you are.
I am in Mexico City, where I live, and it's been very, very rainy lately. Thank God, lots of, or the goddesses, you know, lots of rain has been coming down. And yeah, I'm here. Thanks for inviting me to this wonderful panel.
And maybe we'll just segue right into your reading.
Sure. Well, I'm very excited to read some of the poems that will be published in November by Tender Buttons Press. The book is called the Telerania Circuit, and I will just read a little bit from it. We can later talk about the nature of this book and the concepts I'm exploring and all that. So I'll just jump right into it. Everything is pure projection, like a non-developed film on someone's shelf next to other objects. We're inside the virtual infinity scroll, but the reality of the image will never be revealed by light measurements hitting, waiting for your perception. 5,000 years have passed since the first inscription of gesture, a fossil like a dead wave at the shore, or the etymology of chaos, meaning formless, primordial matter. We met between bardos at the initiation of pattern consciousness, image, noise, truth, only in the dark room. Experiment the moving shape of memory, the archaeology of sound. This vacuum is our thread relation, a series of questions that are also open like breath to breath. Your deathbed in your mother's room, your whole life an archive of inhalations. You were unearthing a city covered in deep time. San Martín, Huamelulpan, in the Mixteca Alta. Score, notation, ossicles, found memory like a found object, a field for animated cavities, localities of erasure. How do I read the music that was city, that was room, that was unseen, like the image of my mother's elbow on your pillow, holding your last breath? The Telerania Circuit is a radio impulse, connect or broadcast while doing something else, like a traveler with a broken bag gathering fragments in transit. I thought you were coming, but I am always late trying to unpack the chorus, the second stanza, the last word image, trying to translate the mechanism into micro prophecy. I wonder if atoms are changing shape in this solstice. I ask myself, what is the anatomy of belief? If we cannot see void. Perhaps corners are the only form of identity. And this is the last one. Feather, desk, mushroom. Words are raw, like meat. They smell and can also rot. Pencil tape type. Letters are molecules. Punto, punctuations don't exist. They're like quantum physics or belong to the family of atoms. This paper is a field, but everything is a field. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. There's wonderful sort of archaeology of language there, the archive of inhalations. Really, really wonderful. And now let's go directly to you, Anne.
Okay, fine. I wanted to read from the small book, little pamphlet that Leanne published in 1990. The poem, the original text was from 1974. It's called Not a Male Pseudonym, and it's dedicated to Bernadette Mayer. So I'll just jump in and read a few pages and maybe jump to a couple of lines I wanted to enter into the conversation. A book, sad brow, let me off on other side. A woman with another table took and decided everything asunder. We'd quarreled, or quick, step out of here. I'm so wide, dear lady, a narrow place like you I'd take to a tent to run my life. Oh, skirt, oh, ankles, speak, ye that walk by the way. Rattling, begin my song, stepsister, holy one, begin my song. Not bitter like mother, as in I arose, a mother aslant, not bitter as in remember 1,000 burning kisses. I see, I fasten you, no one knows I left, but will save all for you. Skin fascinated by yours, obedient, not bitter as this city we live in, rattling, one must travel through us to God. And are you her, the heretic I met before I met myself? Are you a breaker of promises? Do you lie with men? Do you lie with the corn? Do you lie with the other grain? Who sired you? Were you conceived by water at night? Did the earth sing your name? Your mother, did she have the same dark eyes? We are young, say the Polish girls. We are the stalwart horse riders and replace the men singing in our blood. Forget us not, oh, singing in the blood. Women take the leather into their hands, take off doll mask. Rembrandt tortured may yet be mercenary. Speak in your rider voice as you come up behind me and in my ears say it. You want me, say it. You want me, says the night, just like that. You want me, says the clean air, like that. You want me, say breasts cresting to meet lips. You want what between your legs? Shopping for her, that long red dress waves which come and go. I try blue suede to test myself. Why do I hesitate? Sweet back hair, tight. Look at me, call me man. To be a martyr on the streets of Chicago wasn't the point, but oh, close in on me. Behind doors, people do gossip. When you get named by me, God, the woman overflows in us. The earth grows, kick off my heels, and untutored in this, seek the dose of you. I wanted to be a sailor, send my prayers to the holy ocean and to you, happy wife. My hands discover her face, warm blankets, many dictionaries, couplets of praise for her, something Cuban performing. I'll shake the rattle, I'm shaking the rattle, I'll shake the rattle performing for you. I'll shake the rattle, this makes the world keep springing. Shake the rattle, the cities fall into place. Shake the rattle, I'll shake the rattle, the sky won't fall down. Shake the rattle, children settle down. Shake the rattle, singing scent of you. Shake the rattle, seat of you comes forth. Shake the rattle, we dream the end of war. We travel to Asia, see the rattle, the stars fall into place. Shake the rattle, moon abiding there. Shake the rattle, sister, sun abiding there. All the planets fall into place. I'm shaking the rattle, I'll shake the rattle. This one slips through my fingers. Women are like water, says my tongue. My tongue says you're like silvery water. My tongue knows every part of you. Shake the rattle. So that's from Not a Male Pseudonym. And these are the opening lines of a piece for Louis Warsh, who was the co-editor. We founded Angel Hair magazine. So just these opening lines about founding of a little press and magazine. I said it's called Go, Let Go. I said we started it, we founded it then, Angel Hair, that very night, the Robert Duncan reading in Berkeley, 1965, the conference night we met. Robert Duncan commanded we make a magazine. You never, what was the line? You always said no later. It was the car ride. In a car we founded it. How do you found something in a car? It showed the temper of our various minds. Talking in a car is a magazine, I suppose. I wanted it to be falling in love was also this idea. That night we were falling in love and we would be really good together, making something good together. Never just fall in love with a person and make love with them, that we make something. That's the whole point, that we are inside poetry and that Robert Duncan commanded this. I know he did, and he's a magus. And poetry was love for us. Poetry is mysterious. How could he not have cast a spell? You were conversant in the most exciting poetry and the gossip about Jack Spicer hating the Beats. He wouldn't be a part of the conference, and then he died. Too young to think of a house. What think then when they are falling in love? There is no future. We are right now. What I liked was being in this crowd of poetry, wanted to make together another reality now.
Yeah, thank you so much, Anne. That's marvelous. Shake the rattle into that wonderful history of another press that we can honor too with our conversation. And now we can do that. We can just go into conversation. We've got 30 or 40 minutes to talk. I wanted to start by asking Leanne, I noticed that the word multiplicity comes up any number of times in interviews and reviews around the press, about the press, and that Lucia, it comes up in an interview of yours as well, with the phrase, the longing for perceptual integration, a totality of experience within multiplicities. And it also comes up again and again in critical work and interviews with you, Anne. For instance, in an issue of the Brooklyn Rail several years ago, we find Jeffrey Wright's comment, Waldman incorporates multiplicity into skittering, careening discourse in heightened pitch. So it's clearly a term that's key for you all. And it also suggests a theme that we came up with in our conversation the other day, that of overflowing the book. And I was thinking that you're all involved with poetics beyond the page in so many ways, performance, sound, visual art. So Leanne, could you start us out with your thoughts on multiplicity and on overflowing the book as they relate to the press, and then take it anywhere you want.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a huge question, and there are many, many multiple impetuses that started the press, but I wanted to read one quote from Louise Eriger, who was the French feminist theorist and writer who really inspired me and a lot of my peers during college. And that when I first started the press, I'll just read this one quote of many that inspire me. A woman touches herself constantly without anyone being able to forbid her to do so, for her sex is composed of two lips, which embrace continually. Thus, within herself, she is already two, but not divisible into ones, who stimulate each other. And what's so great about this is there's this duality, but there's this third term in the middle. There's like a rubbing or a empty space that touches. And this is evident in many manifestations of the press, including this idea that Bernadette Mayer said of like to write in as many ways as you can imagine. And the other image I wanted to bring forth is just the image of the press, the logo that Joe Brainerd gave me of these two pansy heads. You've seen it on the publicity for the show here today, but the two pansy heads are separate, but there's a vibration between them. There's a relationship. It's not just one pansy, it's two. And that this idea of a community and rubbing up against each other and producing pleasure. So that's one way I would start the conversation. And what you said about performance, I think that's a very vital part of the work that I publish. That yeah, there it is. Thank you. Yeah, they are kind of touching, right? And the little very feminine dress sort of surreally manifested together there. So this kind of radical femininity is important to it, but there's a queerness to it as well. Queering language and playing in the language, but singing the language, singing the ideas. So some of that'll come up in some poems I'll read at the end, but I wanted to toss the ball to Lucia and say, can you say something about multiplicity in your practice as a poet, curator, publisher, performer, audio person, all that, visual person?
Yeah, well, I love to think always in terms of sound. I think my practice of sound is more the theory than the actual practice. But I always think of vibration, you know, and how every impulse is a sort of vibration. So for me, my work is sort of a process of resonance that evolves. So I have to be very alive and very acute to hear the resonance of this. So resonance in itself is multiple, you know, it happens in many surfaces. And so that's one thing I was thinking about multiplicity. Also, I was thinking about language and the syncretic quality of language. You know, language in its essence has multiple meanings, and that's the amazing thing to work in poetry and in other parts, because it's sort of you know, it has this thing kind of like an oracle of recombining and you know, seeing how things what can arise from the recombinations of multiplicities. And also fragments are very important in my practice as well. I do little things here and there, and then sort of see how things come together. So that's one thing. The other thing is the dynamism of surfaces. So I'm really interested in poetry beyond the metaphor. So bringing poetry into the world and actually see what happens in the surfaces of things and of objects. So that leads me also to the idea of the forces of nature, and how I'm very interested in that, in time and nature. And the last thing I'm going to say is that I've been thinking lately a lot about a poetics of friction. So a poetics of friction is a poetics of multiplicity, of course. And what Leanne was saying, but also this sort of collaboration with other non-human forces, with other non-human beings. So I'm very interested in that. And of course, Anne has been an amazing, what's the word, guide to understanding this poetics of friction, and how we can extend this poetics into collaborations, into performances, into publications. So yeah, I would like to ask Anne as well, what's her approach to multiplicity and overflowing?
Just have a lot of things going simultaneously and embrace the tentacular, be like an octopus. But in any case, you and I were just on a few months ago on a rooftop in Mexico City, performing a text of mine and text of yours, but the idea was Braided River. And we were videotaped by Natalia Gaia. And that's now exists as a Braided River work. And it was somewhat spontaneous. We decided to meet there. We knew each other's work and voices, but we moved a lot. I mean, it really has this almost dance-like quality. And it's a very beautiful day. And also we're in the middle of pandemic mode and reality, so that the preciousness of being able to do that actually outside, and that I was able to get there. So that notion of being able to do things in with your communities, with when you see people, when it's so rare to be in physical presence. But I feel like all these projects have come, I kind of landed in places that invited or called to me. It's a calling. And just that Angel Hair Magazine and Books came out of this incredible generative energy of the Berkeley Poetry Conference with, Ginsberg and Olson, who was king of the raft, and then getting in touch with some of the wonderful small presses in San Francisco, like White Rabbit, publishing folk like Robin Blazer and Spicer and so on, sort of extending the community, Joanne Kiger, et cetera. So that with Angel Hair, we were publishing bi-coastally, and also the poet Lee Harwood, who was in the UK. That was one of our first books, inviting visual artists in as well, from Jim Dine to Alex Katz to Jane Freilicher in many of these sort of projects. So this idea of collaborations with the visual artists, collaborations in the making of the book with the different authors, and often publishing early books or first books by younger poets. So, and then the work I'm doing right now with the Jack Kerouac School, we're working on a preservation plan for our 47-year archive, which is huge. So the notion of all this, discourse and teaching and discussion and argument and query goes on, and we continue. We're recording our Carrier Waves program this summer, and hopefully won't have to be virtual next year. We'll see. But in any case, that sense of then the archive and what that is, because it's a very oral archive. This is the audio archive principally, and the video archive. And then we've been building books. I've done a number of anthologies, working with transcription of text and then editing of text. And that's coming up, a new book with Nightboat called New Weathers, co-edited with Emma Gomez, who is a Catalan American poet and essayist and so on. So we've been working on that, and she was working on collaborating with Ed Bowes, filmmaker, and we wrote a text for that. And these things come up in the moment, and you're so happy to be with other artists and friends in this work. There's lots of other stuff going on, but I'm very blessed to be to have come into these incredible radical alternative communities from an early age.
Yeah, thank you. That's just wonderful to have that bit of background that comes forward. We see how much that background is still inflecting everything that happens today. So it's really great. And kind of carrying on with the notion of collaboration, I know, Leanne, that Tender Buttons is actually, though you're the one spearheading it, and there's also a lot of collaboration that goes on with the logistics of the press and with the actual construction of books. Could you tell us about that hands-on experience and how that works?
It's for over 30 years, it's always been people around me that I just asked to help. And of course, there's when it first started, I just asked all the poets that made books how to do it, and I got the downloads from everybody. But it's been a group collective effort for a long time, and there's been sometimes periods of not producing much. It's very, in a way, it feels kind of under the radar kind of a project. It's even what Publishers Weekly said about it, like a very effective under the radar project. We don't have a huge list in terms of links, but very concentrated, collaborative, gym-like kind of constructions from each book. But Katie Bohentz has been really a great force in the past like 5 or 6 years, really helping with a lot of the manifestation of it in the physical realm. But that's the idea I have, is like there's like all these airy ideas, and like we have to like channel them down and ground them and bring them to earth. And like this kind of this another third term in play of how do we manifest all this work that's floating around and needs to be heard, and bring it to the people. How do we make it activated? And small press publishing conversations can get bogged down in things about, how do we design this? I mean, but it's, that's vital to it, about how is the form of the book going to change? And over 30 years, I've been working with Julie Patton to try to make a book called B. And we don't know if it's going to be in quotes like Zhukovsky's A, or single quotes, or no quotes yet. I mean, it's still in process, but this idea of this huge archive of her work that we're sort of playing with and braiding together with the material that we have already and what we will interact with to activate the archive and make it more available. And while I'm thinking of that, I want to send the word out. If anybody has seen a Julie Patton performance or has any archival footage or notations or pictures, please send them to us, because we're making a big gathering of helping her with her archive that's activated. And of course, B is a tiny, tiny part of it, but it can grow very expansively. There's a lot more I could say, but the thing, an anecdote I wanted to slip in there was when I came to the Writing from the New Coast conference in Buffalo when I was in my 20s. I was put on a small press publishing panel, and I chose to do the Robert Duncan fairy play as my response. And I had people in the audience, and got up and we did this very short poetic play. And there's this man on the panel that said, well, what does that have to do with small press publishing? And I was like, it's about getting the work out there. It's about a gift, to give people and have the work be central, not just talking about it, even though theory can be a great poem as well, but yeah. Go for it, somebody else.
Leanne, I love that so much, and so sorry to cut in, but I just wanted to share the magic of the chat. Is number one, Alistair Julian has Julie Patton footage for you. Hopefully we can connect a little later. And Emma Gomez just joined the Zoom. Just so
Thank
sweet.
you.
Great. I love both the anecdotes and the practical details. And there was an interview online about the way, just the day-to-day press, who designs, who does. And I know that Lucia, that's also an issue with your emerging press and with what you've been doing with the journal, et cetera. Would you talk a little bit about the concrete day-to-day nuts and bolts of collaborating?
Sure. Well, first of all, because Anne was talking about the thing we did in the rooftop, the improvisation, I wanted to talk a little bit like how I met Anne and like what that meant in my practice as a publisher and as a poet and as an artist. I met Anne in a little workshop for women through Rocío Cerón, a poet from Mexico City. And when I met her, it was amazing because she was already working with a community in Mexico that I work with as well, in performance, in art, and in music. And she was also, of course, part of the whole New York scene. And I had studied in New York previously, so and worked at the Rail actually. So my knowledge of publishing came very much from that part. And so it was really interesting because it really binded together something. And immediately we started collaborating. I went to Naropa the summer later, and it sort of opened up a world for me that was very interesting to bind together. And talking about that, I wanted to, what Leanne was saying about the gift and the generosity of publishing, I wanted to talk about language and publishing, the value of that. It's not to be legible, but it is the affect, that is behind language and behind collaboration and behind that generosity of publishing. So it is really sort of a dance of these affects that we encounter with friends and with people and with collaborators. And yeah, Disonare, my editorial project that I do with my partner Diego Gerard, we started it 8 years ago or more, I can't remember, 2013. And we started it because we wanted to bind together our communities from Mexico and from New York. and to also publish our friends, emerging writers. And we were always very interested in experimentation and in the hybrid work. And well, now we just published, tomorrow we will receive it, our first book for the press. That is Peter Lamborn Wilson in Spanish, his essays and collages and poems. It's been a huge, work, and we've been working the whole year on this. And Anne has to do a lot with this collaboration as well, because she's the one who introduced us to Peter, that we already knew, but we didn't know how to, create a bridge there. So it's really interesting, the editorial communities and the publishing communities, how we help each other. It is really a labor of love. And the Rail, of course, has helped me a lot, and Diego as well. So, so yeah, it's really great to celebrate this and to celebrate Leanne and what she's done. Because also it has that other output of women's poetry and women's experimentation. So I don't know if Anne or Leanne want to talk a little bit about that that vein of women's experimental publishing.
Yeah, I'd love to hear about that too, because clearly it is a press that publishes women. So what does that mean? And I was also thinking about history here, and you published Agnes Lee, your grandmother's journal, that's right. And I was thinking your upcoming book has to do with a relative a female relative who was an archaeologist. So how is history and women coming into this too? So maybe Leanne, if you want to take that.
Well, one metaphor I thought of is like being a poet publisher is sort of being like a pregnant midwife, if you want to be be graphic about the femaleness. But I feel like I always want to rewrite the mission statement now that we have this great gender expansiveness has come into the culture, and I keep trying to figure out exactly how to say it. I don't want to just say experimental writing by women, which is I want to add like gender expansive, gender creative, gender, this great field of gender explosion has come into the culture since I mean, it's always been there, but like it's become visible, and that's an important part of the press as well. But to manifest that multiplicity again of people that create poetry in different ways, and like that's the way that I love the Eriger again, is because it was the first time I recognized that you could have a non-linear way of thinking, that was sort of legitimized by the Academy, which I don't need to have, but that poetry is this place where all these things can come together. Malvika's laughing in the chat. The pregnant midwife, yeah. I wanted before we go on, Lucia, could you tell me more? You said this great story about how you met Anne, and you're like, oh
yeah, I was telling Leanne the other day. Yeah, I remember when I met Anne, because I already knew her work through Maria Sabina, that I was obsessed already with Maria Sabina, the great shaman from Mexico, and her poems. My father made a film, a small documentary of Maria Sabina in the 70s. So I grew up with that sort of longing for that. So I knew Anne's work, and yeah, I was telling Leanne the other day that when the workshop finished that day and I came back home, I was sort of like, I was telling Leanne, I said like, fuck, like this is it, like, oh no, like, it like sort of the doors kind of opened in a weird way, and it was kind of like my commitment to poetry and to becoming a poet and becoming a publisher and like writing it, and it was a feeling of surrender and also of celebration, but also like, oh, okay, so this is it. And I think Anne also convinced Leanne, or she was part of the impulse of Leanne to create Tender Buttons.
Yeah,
so
she also said like, you should start a magazine. Yeah.
What did I missed something.
Oh, Leanne said you should start a magazine. I'd forgotten that Robert Duncan had said that to her, but she said you should start a magazine. And I said, hey, wait a second. I'm always a little bit going to do something slightly different and say, no, I want to do books. They seem more central, more lasting. But now we have to explode the book. Keep the book.
No,
Overthrow it.
No, I was just going to say, it's a matter of, passing the torch in a way. And, thinking back on I had a little, press when I was living in the mountains, Rocky Ledge, that I don't even have a full set of, little things that arise in the occasion of where you are, very much related to locale and who's around. But I do want to bring in this notion of, this was the Angel Hair anthology, and Louis Warsh, my co-editor and partner who I'd first met in Berkeley, and that's a whole other story, but just some of his lines here from the intro are really interesting because it had to do with, we were creating this as we were also becoming poets. So he writes, and Waldman and I met in the earliest stages of our becoming poets. Possibly editing a magazine is a tricky idea under these circumstances. Possibly it's the best idea to test one's ideas before you even have them or when they're pre-embryonic. In a sense, doing a magazine at this early moment was our way of giving birth as much to the actual magazine and books as to ourselves as poets, like Leanne's pregnancy. We were going on nerve, all of 20 years old, but trusting in our love, which was less tricky, and in the moment defied all uncertainty. The fact that we were growing up through the editing of the magazine and writing our own poems at the same time was a complicated process and gave us a lot of permission to make mistakes, stumble, and recover. It was by making mistakes, as in every endeavor, that we learned. From the start, the contents of the magazine mirrored our social encounters as much as any fixed aesthetic. We had a point of departure, which was the New American Poetry Anthology, Donald Allen, which had appeared in 1960. And then he talks about encountering that book really young. He was a teenager then. Then he talks about his version of how we started. But I was still in school, and one of my teachers was Georges Guy, a French writer and translator who was working with Kenneth Koch. And so being in New York, having early exposure to some of those poets from the so-called New York school, et cetera. But early on, for example, that thing of, the door is just open. There's this great line from John Ashbery's line, the Academy of the Future is opening its doors to us. So I wrote a little homage for Jane Freilicher. It was one of her incredible parties at the New Year on Fifth Avenue, and all these, major people within that incredible coterie, Nexus, New York, and all the extensions to the visual artists. But at the end, I talk about how that occasion, as you were saying, was opening its doors to us. So I think that's very important. If you can take the, whatever it is, that impulse that continues. And, I just want to say also there's a kind of a social concern, activist energy to the project, which was always, at the founding of Naropa with DePrima and Ginsberg, at the founding of the Poetry Project with the Vietnam War raging and people we knew in Vietnam and people we knew trying to get out of Vietnam and moving to Canada and so on. So, a lot of it, just as, we went through AIDS crisis. So I want to bring in that sense of where you are in the time that you are doing all these multiplicities and what that is even now, how that informs and actually continues this pulse of what's needed in a way. And I think By Any Means Necessary is one of Diane's, she talks about founding with Amiri Baraka, The Floating Bear, and so on. So these wonderful individual stories, very personal, very intimate, and yet so expansive. And I felt at Berkeley, where were the women? There were no women really at that festival, so that became sort of, get it going. And then feeling that, there's something I want to just keep giving to the extended binaries and genders and everything. I mean, as we all feel, I have, my love poem for Bernadette, and that, covers a certain reality, but also it's just poetry.
It's a great turn to take into the activism and those issues. And I think there's so many levels that can take place on. And I'd love to hear, Leanne, what you're thinking about in terms of the political ramifications of the work you're doing. And I'm thinking perhaps too of the omnibus, that impulse, like the Angel Hair Anthology, to create a single work, and what's the difference in terms of political impact of gathering work, framing it.
Well, one thing about the omnibus is I was inspired by the big reprint of The Floating Bear that Diane DePrima and Mary Baraka did, that Anne just mentioned, like this huge tome of accumulation that just does little bits at a time, and then it becomes this massive, range of different approaches to working with the language, and it comes back to Bernadette Mayer's eternal question of like, can poetry change the world? And she asks it sincerely, and she says, and I think the only way it can is on the level of message, but also of play that has to have a multiple hit. It has to have multiple fronts that and change the way we think, because the language is related to the way we think and the way we perceive. And so it's a very deep practice to be doing poetry, that you want to affect people's ways of perceiving the world and subverting even like the avant-garde cut-up, like William Burroughs. We have Dodie Bellamy's cunt-ups, where she says, is the cut-up a male form? And she's saying, no, I'm doing it this way, my way, and just sort of experimenting with these things that are sort of given as radical, and then going further, but on the level of the phoneme, and what else should I say? I don't know. I have a lot of notes here, but it's hard to just put my finger on them. But yeah, I did want to just show make shout out to Ron Padgett for this wonderful New York school book that has the Joe Brainerd. I have my visual aid here, Joe Brainerd cover, but of course, Bernadette Mayer is the only woman in the anthology, so that was one of the many impetuses, and to say let's do more, and then Richard Castellanet's putting the Yale Gertrude Stein, saying there's no visible influence of Stein on women writers in America, and I was like, I saw that in college, and I was like, I have to do something. So that was that's still being unfurled, Yeah.
That was odd with the anthology. I mean, this is a strange story, but getting a letter from Ron about how he was really interested in putting work in, but it couldn't also apply to my partner at the time, who was also a poet. So I was being excluded because I was in a partnership with a male poet who wasn't being invited into the book. So anyway, the times have changed.
Yeah, I mean,
I was thinking too, Lucia, clearly the political situation is very, very different in Mexico, and there's something different politically about making the gesture of bridging between these two huge cities. How do you see activism playing out in your projects?
Well, I guess from many different perspectives. For instance, like the gesture of bringing the thinking of Peter Lamborn Wilson into a Spanish-speaking audience, I think there is a political gesture there for sure. Of course, sometimes we have troubles in what does it mean to translate a male author from the US into Mexico. But I feel in the end, in the Sonare, we are very interested in the value of thinking, and that can really be a catalyst for something else. For instance, I think I bridge very much the thinking of Peter Lamborn Wilson with a project we've been doing at the prison in Mexico City with the women, because the framing of that project has to do with the temporary autonomous zone that, of course, Anne has brought so much to the community here in Mexico, Rizoma. That is, Rizoma is the name of the workshops we do in the prison, but we also call Rizoma the community here in Mexico. That some of us, we go to the prison, but some of us collaborate here as well So I think it's interesting to dissolve hierarchies in some way and see what things can work around certain things. So that input of the temporary autonomous zone has worked so much to do the workshops in the prison, to do poems with the women in prison, performances that will later be published through Disonare as a publication. You know, so we try to sort of thread all these things between two, as you say, two big cities. And something else I wanted to say that we were talking with Leanne is about, you know, how the political climate towards feminism has changed in generations. But I was thinking this morning, the gesture of still publishing women poets is very, very, very necessary still, obviously, because I think we are recovering from patriarchal epistemology, you know, from a moral discourse of that. And this recovery is going to take a long time, you know, so it's really important to keep putting things out in the world and not give up.
And I'm going to kind of bounce it back to you, Leanne, thinking about the way that you put things out, again, this kind of beyond poetry, beyond the page idea, and the way you've incorporated different registers of song coming from different places. And Anne you seem very involved in that too, bringing in these huge traditions that seems to me to have a political implication and bringing these things into the future. Leanne, would you like to talk? And then I'd love to hear from Anne on that too.
Yes, I've worked a lot from, it sort of went back to my roots with, you know, hymns and ballads, their sources, to work with those forms, to rewrite. And that was a lot inspired by Julie Kupferberg, of his para songs, where he did these parodies of like, you know, what a friend we have in Sigmund, and like, you know, I see the White House and I want to paint it black, like these kind of but very pointed political songs that, and also really gorgeous ones that he did lyric, setting, you know, Dover Beach to an ancient Jewish temple melody. These kind of mashup was very important in my early encounters with how to make poetry. And I think, like Anne, I think I have also wanted to move toward improvisation. I think Anne's great works with Meredith Monk and things that are so inspiring about just being able to be so present in your body and in your poetry and having a score and then working from it and being able to make a new poem, a new piece as you perform, but you have a basis for it. And that's what Julie Patton does in her own way. Like there are all these very individualistic practices. That this idea, and it reminded me of this moment when I was, I got sort of annoyed when I was giving readings, and I would sing during about a quarter of it, in and out, and people would always come up and say, I love it when you sang, because it like sets this vibration up in their bodies, and I loved it, they loved it. But then I felt like, what about the other 75% of the reading? Nobody said anything about that. But then I grew to embrace that. And I'm trying to look at the positive of like, how can I go further with this integration and improvisation? And also it reminded me of the duality I felt as poet and publisher. Like Tender Buttons was getting a lot of traction, and I was like, what about my poetry? But I see it as it's so much together. It's so much that is part of my work as a curator. I do these parlors, I do these reading series in my house, in Chelsea with my husband, Tony Torn. We do Torn Page, and we do these gatherings. And we took a break during the pandemic, and we're looking forward to starting that up again in the fall and having some encounters with poets and doing a circle of singing and of writing together and walking around and having being with each other in the room. As Meredith Monk said the other day in a workshop, there's something electric happens when you're in the room with other people, and this is certainly electric via electricity. But I love that we're connecting all over the world. But I also want to keep going with the in-person thing. And that's what singing does for me, especially, is you reach the other person's body with your voice.
And Anne, I'm thinking about trickster feminism and how all the forms that come into that, the chant, the blues, etc., and then your actual off the page performance practice. How do those go together, and what inspires what?
Well, again, it goes back to early stuff, growing up in the village and I was a member of the children's, I don't know, what was it called? House Theater, Greenwich House. So we would do a performance through song and poetry of the history of America. We're tenting tonight on the old campground. Give us a song to church. So on. So that, and then always kind of drawn to performative places and jobs, and worked at Theater Genesis before the project even officially started. So there was a lot of activity combining the different arts at St. Mark's, including film, around other multi, tentacular folk, but also the more avant-garde film scene around Stan Brakhage. So a lot of affinity there. And finding ways that it worked, to be working together. And often it would be an invitation, or often it would be an occasion where something had to happen. I took some lessons with Lamont Young at one point, singing North Indian singing. That was very helpful. Just very simple. I stayed with it maybe 4 or 5 months, not a long.
Oh wait, tell us a little bit more about that.
Just that Pandit Prannath would come regularly and perform in Lamont's studio, Miriam Zizil, and they were accompanying him. And then there were classes offered with him. And then Lamont, after he had left town, often Lamont would sort of take over. So just very curious about opening up the larynx and working with, I was sort of into mantra, these vibrational qualities of, syllables basically, and what was mantra, and what was I was very interested in the alap form in Indian music, which is the sort of introduction before the raga actually starts. And of course, it's a morning raga, an evening raga, particular circumstances of the day and what's possibly going on. And there's also this incredible place for improvisation. So in the alap, as I understand it, things are introduced that are later built on. And so you're presenting, in a way, this whole possibility, potentialities of ways the thing can go. And then within that very, disciplined structure, but also ecstatic. And I love that form. I was very drawn to more Asian forms, having had a more left margin poetry teaching as a young person. So on. So that led to more confidence about vocal stuff. And then as I, in these last years, very engaged with my family and immediate community of musicians, and working in collaboration with Janice Lowe as Leanne is, working with larger groups. The album Siamiki, which came out from Levi Gorvey Gallery and Fast Picking Music, has a number of folk from William Parker to Laurie Anderson and so on. So able to, collaborate in these such interesting ways where all the people are very attentive to the words. That was often my problem I remember with, traveling on the Rolling Thunder, just that you could hear the words. You could hear the words with Dylan, but you could not often, some drummer is going to play with you, Anne, in a reading in a park, and it just becomes, impossible. There's no way that you're hearing the language. So very particular about that. I think, what do I want to say about the current, I think in terms of the political work, and this idea of needing to get out, into the streets in a way, not just that kind of but as we've been locked in too, that through Leanne just talking about what poetry was, and Bernadette's comment, but the slogan we have at the Kerouac School, which Alan and I started, was the point of poet, because people say, why a poetry school? Why so on? The point is to help wake the world up to itself. So you're like a mirror, there are all these things that you talked about, it can be opacity and transparency and dream and dailiness and a certain kind of rigor with the, the minute forms, and being, someone who's been of the time. I mean, hearing, John Cage early on was so powerful, hearing, that and feeling part of a continuum. And I love Susan Sontag's line about, I just want to carry, my line was, I just want to carry some jazz guys' bags. But Susan talked about being a foot soldier in the continuum, and kind of trying to, I feel like we need to leave some kind of thread of our humanity, and the most skillful means is poetry and voice and all these attendant things you've all spoken of. But the work that, Lucia is doing, continuing the connection to the women in the prison, which is very powerful situation. I'm brilliant thinking and suffering and how to mitigate and work with that anyway. It's very powerful, and to continue that relationship over some years is so important. And through a pandemic, when the women in the prison can't even see their own children, that sort of thing. So being attentive in these ways that you can, then you arise with the skillful means to,
The quality of attention, I was thinking too, at some point we touched on the notion of beyond the human and the importance of attention beyond the human. And I was thinking, Lucia, of some of the pieces I've heard of yours, listening to insects, for instance, and listening the whole issue of found sound, or listening to other things beyond what normally falls into our attention. Would you have a moment just to talk about that?
Well, I'm very interested in the how to shift or how to alter the the ethnocentrist perception of senses, just in general. So during the pandemic, actually, I started I don't know, observing more insects, and it's how they move, how they sound, like all of these little subtle things. I'm very interested in the ephemeral and the subtleties of things. And I started thinking also the interesting part of like, for instance, insects, morphology and sexuality, and like, all this span of possibilities, and how much they have to we have to learn from this other species and other things, kind of even as this idea of ancestry and evolution and all this. And I also was thinking of prayer. I don't know why at the same time, and the sound of stridulation, and the sound of when insects copulate, and this high vibration of erotics in a way. So I was thinking of drone as well, and how drone is like this sustained vibration, and in a way how insects remind me of that sustained vibration as a sort of threaded prayer. So things from here, things from there, but that's why I made this album called Insect Poem, and it's called Rezo as in prayer. I'm very interested as well in shamanism, and in some shamans in Mexico say jalar los rezos, to pull the strings of prayer. So these pieces are kind of about that. Yeah.
That's great. And maybe a great moment to segue into some questions and comments from the people here, because I think there's no doubt a lot of them. So maybe we'll open up in that direction. I'm going to pass it on to Malvika and let you take it away.
So much, Cole. And I completely agree. I feel like this entire conversation has just been a masterclass. Not even in editing, writing, but a masterclass in living. And I'm really impressed with many of the questions that have come in, actually all of them. So our first question will come from the wonderful Natalie Pravosti, And you should be able to turn on your microphone.
Oh, okay.
Well.
I'm gonna,
Hi.
hi. I wrote it a while ago. Okay, I had two thoughts. One is for you, Lucia. It went back to the thought around the Peter Lamborn Wilson and contemporary autonomous zone and kind of ordinary banality daily life. And I'm curious just how or where or what you have done. And I'm not asking something grand, not asking about publishing, but just in a personal or a smaller, intimate way, you have exercised a kind of temporary autonomous zone, like something personal or intimate, or like whatever comes to mind.
Okay. Well, we've been talking a lot about erosion, and I was thinking also the other day, much of my practice is impulse of erosion. I think it comes from eroding a hierarchy of, as I said, of epistemology, of value.
Yes.
So more and more I get into the idea of the ephemeral, and what is value if you take away the normal sort of judgment of it. So I think the temporary autonomous zone is giving that value to that ephemerality in certain moments that are unpredictable, that just happen at certain times. And it's so much about relation. Of course, the temporary autonomous zone can't happen by, in a single-minded perspective, but it's about communion, and it's about, something arising sort of outside of time. So it's just attention to those moments and going towards that affect of other relations being human or non-human.
Have you had does something come to mind specifically? I mean, I think what you're saying is it arises, it happens kind of on its own, or you can foster your awareness, but I know you've had a health thing recently, and even just I'm imagining waking up in the morning, it's possible for a bug on the window to do this. So I'm just wondering what, like, if something specific that you can think of where you've experienced it, like that somehow informs.
Mm-hmm. Well, of course, we've talked about this, but the time in the prison is definitely a temporary autonomous zone moment, because there's a radical care for other people. There is a dissolution of the self in a very beautiful and care. It's just real care. So and that happens through music, that happens through poetry, that happens through not knowing what's going to happen, through improvisation.
And
So,
dance.
Nahuatl
dance.
Yeah, it's just kind of the liberation of language and the liberation of form, and that happens in every time I've been to the prison through these workshops. That's exactly what it happens. And the woman one time asked Anne, who was there, what is this? And Anne just pointed to because we were in a little classroom in the prison that said, zona de creatividad, creativity zone. And Anne just said, it's the zone, it's the interzone. That's what's happening now. So that feeling, yeah, that's something I can recall. It's probably not that intimate, a moment of my daily life, but that is what comes to mind now.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
I wonder if that question could be extrapolated to, everyone else in the room, in the panel. If something comes to mind, do you have a framework, a container for how you implement or sustain a temporary autonomous zone?
I've been planting a spiral garden at the top of the hill, just going out. It's got about 3 rays, and I was sort of obsessing on it so much I wasn't doing my poetry, and then I started getting rashes all over it. So it's throwing me out of the garden, and I still go up there. But the middle has a motherwort plant, and then the end is going to be a pawpaw, so it's like mother to father. So there's all this weird symbolic things that sort of improvisationally come up, and every time I go on a walk, I bring a stone back from the walk, and this is the one I found the other day. So it's B. So I put B at the middle to remind me to write to Julie again, make the B solid, grounded.
That's incredible.
Like one of the Venuses. The Venus, it looks like one of the Venuses, the Venus of Willendorf.
Yeah.
Of Leanne.
Got that figure.
Beautiful.
Yeah. I love that in your life, when you need a reminder, it doesn't come in the form of a post-it, it comes in the form of geological time, presenting you the B rock.
AKA the Venuses of Williamsburg.
Very lovely. Thank you so much for that, that response, both. In the interest of time, our next question comes from the wonderful poet Linda Norton. I will read it on her behalf. She's tuning in from Sligo in Ireland. And here's the question. She goes, here's a little anecdote I shared with Leanne, a question about libraries, public luxury, books, distribution, gift economy, a la Hyde, etc. She says, I guess I'm thinking about my time as an acquisitions editor at UC Press, and the way much of our poetry list kind of built on canonized work, writers, poets that had been published first by so many small press publishers. And she sort of says, when she offered Harriet a UC Press contract, the first thing she said was, oh, great, now my books will be in libraries. And I see Dorothy has a new distribution arrangement with the New York Review Books Press, and my thinking is that their books will get into libraries. As someone who's lived on a limited budget and is very dependent on libraries, I wonder if you feel like talking about libraries and other ways to get works into the hands of people who might otherwise not know about or get small press books. Love, Linda.
Yeah, I mean, libraries are very, very important to me as a child and I have this poem in Ode to Libraries. It's because I'm a Libra. It's like Libra / library. But yeah, it's that's one of the rubs is like the whole physical manifestation of how to get the books to people is definitely a challenge, so how to fund that. Like the business side has not been my strong point. So like I would like to find ways to make that more available. And I guess that's something that I need to work on. I think it's so important to have that access. And I guess, one way is to do these, electronic books and things, but there's something about holding a book in your hand. And that my friend said that there's a lot of psychological work about the position your body's in when you hold the book. And I just think I really want to keep the book, in print and in people's hands. But I think it's one of the many things that we need to work on and need help with, it's like how to get those into libraries. And I mean, just one short anecdote is when I first did Bernadette Sonnets, the very first book, I had done an internship at a library in Charlotte, North Carolina. And I was so excited. And I brought the book to the library for their collection. And it has, some wild language in it, I don't know if that's why it did not appear on the shelves. I checked back later, it was not in the catalog. A donation from a young intern of a self-published book from a small press didn't make it to the Charlotte Public Library. So it's a desire I have. It's one of the things I started the press with. I went into St. Mark's Books and I didn't see a Bernadette Mayer on the shelf. There was like one copy of Utopia, which is actually a free book, and they had trouble stocking it because it was free and they didn't want to put it on the shelf, but somehow they did. But I said I want these books to be on the shelves, and it's painful when I go into a bookstore or a library and don't see the books that I want to be there. So that's still a desire that is not all the way satiated.
Well, that brings in gift economy because you can make donations and larger things, I'm trying to do this thing of small pamphlets and so on around the Naropa archive and include them in a partnership around preserving our archive, there'll be more information on that, but it's, I don't think that the doors are completely closed. And I was able to do a little kind of residency. I was able to use the little rooms at the New York Public right before the pandemic. And I wanted to get to some books you can't, you have to kind of be inside to get to. They won't let them out of the temporary autonomous zone of the library. So, I started thinking of all the possibilities to, create further sort of flows. And they do a lot of programming with children in all ages and with poetry, but it's a good, sort of good example. And it's a huge, but still struggling institution. And I think in your, wherever you are in these smaller places, you can start like a lending library or things that you have duplicates of, or you receive so much in the mail, I'm sure many of you. And I think I'm glad Linda brought this up, a sort of more practical way of doing all these things we've been talking about, being in the world, helping people to read, coming to it. We planned at one point some kind of vehicle that would go through all of Colorado, follow the Colorado River. It hasn't been done yet, but I think it's very, you can get involved with your library wherever you are. Laurie Anderson wanted to do a project around the Trump, during the height of the Trump monstrosity, whatever. And there was a problem there because they're public institutions. So, all the more reason why we need these alternative kinds of spaces and locations in the temporary zones where you don't have to be up against the kind of legal realities, borders. So maybe there's something, they check the books and vet them before they're allowed on the shelves. I think you should try it.
Or all the more reason to put it on boats.
Boats.
Yeah. Just skip the public entirely and dock the boat. But thank you so much. I feel like this has really opened up a lot of conceptual terrain for us. Our next question, I'm trying to sort of keep them moving, but our next question comes from our regular Joshua. And Josh, you should be able to turn on your mic at will. My understanding is this is a question about metaphysics.
All right.
Hi.
Okay. My apologies about that. Hello to all of the lovely ladies on this matriarchal panel. My question was basically for you all writers. All right. Hold on. This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to go back to the chat so I can see what I was about to ask y'all.
Josh, I have your question. Do you want me to read it? And then you can riff on it. Would that be okay? All right. Joshua's question was question for Lucia, and I would say perhaps question for all. Having an understanding in shamanism, do you feel it is more important getting your poetry across, or whether your listeners understand being in a higher sense realm dimension? Josh,
including those cymatics from your poetry, if that makes sense. Yeah. Sorry about that, Malvika.
That's okay. I was going to say what I saw in this question that I thought really intriguing was kind of what I see as a question about like musicality or content. Like, is it about the transmission of the fidelity of the original thing, or is it about craft? But Josh, you can say if that's not the perspective you had.
Along those lines, Malvika, because I listen to a lot of poetry. I write poetry myself as well. And a lot like the meters are on point, everything, as well as like your feet and stuff like that in your stanzas. But what I was wondering, because a lot of people say this about my poetry, is that sometimes with my word flow, it's not quite like free writing, but it's kind of like it's kind of like a almost when it comes from the top. You know what I'm saying? So it's kind of like that. So my message was, as you get these downloads through the ethers and through the harmonics, of your sensitivity to your surrounding area, is it much more important whether you get the message that you're feeling across to your people, or whether you're just putting it out there? See what I'm saying? So it's two dynamics, what I'm explaining. So I was wondering from you ladies, what was, like y'all perspective on how y'all deliver y'all message? Do y'all deliver it just straight like, okay, this is what I'm gonna put out today, or I need these people to hear this? Thank you, Malvika. Thank you.
Thank you, Joshua. I think it's so necessary for it to be all intertwined. And I think I do emphasize the sonic and the cymatic and the vibratory, because that gets neglected a lot in poetry. A lot of times it's all about the message. And I feel like that it has to be both, and it has to be like Ron Silliman had this great essay that I heard him present at Naropa a long time ago about language as a 17-sided or 20-sided dice, like in Dungeons and Dragons, where like all the different sides of language are happening. It's not just like two things or three things. It's like this very multiplicitous thing. And for a poem to really work for me, it has to have at least three elements really engaging, hopefully more. But the sound to me is so vital. And I love that you use the word cymatic imaging, because we have a good friend, Jimmy O'Neill, who works with cymatic images. He sets up like an organ or a piano or something, a vibratory sound making device in a space, and then has his water, and he photographs, somehow he makes the painting out of the patterns, the cymatic patterns of the vibrations in the room, and then makes a piece for that room. So that kind of idea of how these, these vibrations, when you're doing your poems, it's performing your poems to give someone a message. The way you're saying it, and the vowel sounds you use, and the vibrations and the tones are so important. Yes.
Oh, can you hear that? Sorry,
Yeah, it's good. It's like insects.
Yeah.
That's the gas that they're shouting. El gas, like gas is here.
Oh,
Sorry, I thought I was muted.
No, that's okay.
No, I love this. I didn't hear that. I thought you meant the clicking of the keys. I love the sounds of like in people in the street singing. Like we have somebody comes down our street to cut, sharpen the knives, and they have bells and things. I love that.
Oh, that's incredible. I love that so much.
Well,
yeah, go ahead.
So to answer that question, I was thinking also about like the idea of leaking, in poetry, like pregnancy as well. Like you sort of fill up, and then at some point the poem comes out, and that part is when the poem happens. It's not like you're thinking before, but it's like very instantaneous. But it's a leak, I think. It's something that you are thinking and you are feeling, and it's already inside of you, but at some point it just pops out. So I think that's important to get across, but also all the process that happens in that getting towards that leak is also the poem, So
I thought a lot about also telepathy during this period of pandemic, and some of the work, particular tracking of certain things, being in places where you're feeling very much the weather and the fires that were in Colorado and coming back now, and the way the planets and moon, the air, all the qualities change. So you're much more hypersensitive to those waves and things coming, and then you're getting all your messages are coming through in this, through this technology. And then I was also trying to see all of us as these little divinities in our little niches, our little screens, our little retreats, our little reliquaries. I mean, all kinds of things go on as you consider, the phases of existence, the phases of the vast phases of the multiverse. But I do think, both, that there is a kind of immediate thing. Often you haven't even thought it through and you're ready to offer something. And then there's this, very almost metaphysical journey that goes on as you consider things and as you maybe slow down. I mean, my experience of the last is shared with many, you know, things have seemed very speeded up on some level and also incredibly strange. I don't even know often what month it is or what day it is. But also ritual and like Lucia's talked about, you know, interest in shamanic practices and trying to, you know, through many years of curiosity and exploring, you know, been witness to events, you know, medicine making and, you know, in a sort of Tibetan Buddhist community that goes on for a month. You're basically chanting and dancing and performing to put the energy into the medicine. And you're working with threads. They're actually little threads, colored threads that you're kind of hooked up to. So you're wired to this intention. So intentionality is often important with particular kinds of work for me personally. And there's also the dailiness and the, you know, catching of these moments or the conversation or the dream, you know, all that's part of it. So I would say, I mean, you sound like you're, you know, very kind of in touch with some things, and just to keep trusting that, very precious. I've been doing these baths with stones and ashes, trying to follow my dreams, to do, you know, to break through some sense of a blockade. I mean, we're so out of alignment in the whole planet, of course, but in, you know, within our own little worlds and the karma of each individual world that we're in, you know, in these intersecting cycles and so on. I mean, it's so much to keep track of. And I'm very grateful for poetry just being such a help. It's everything.
And I love that so much. And I also wanted to point out S. Holland in the chat said yes to all of this, and also how people have dreamt during the pandemic, that this whole other aspect of it, that we've all kind of gone into the territory of dreams, which I think is so fantastic. I've been thinking a lot in the last, as you've been speaking, I've been thinking a lot about sort of dream revelation and like the idea of like cure yourself through dreams. And this is all to say, this is all resonating deeply. And thank you all so much. I think this is a beautiful place to move to poetry. So we have a tradition at the Rail of closing out our lunches with a poem read by a member of the community. And today we're so lucky to have Leanne Brown, both poet and book publisher, share the other component of her practice with us. So Leanne, take it away.
Thank you. I loved what you were saying about dreams. I've been doing so much work with that the past few years, and there are some dream things woven into some of these poems. But I wanted to mention before I forget is that one of the manifestations that I'm making is this Tinder vinyl literary audio wing of Tinder Buttons, where it's going to be more sound recordings and podcasts. And we, you know, worked with Janice Lowe to help release her songs. Leaving Clee, Songs of Nomadic Dispersal. But I'm going to read a few things, and just now, I won't explain so I can get them all in. I think I have 4 pieces. Okay. But Will Alexander's quote about writing out of the energy of dreams has been a guiding principle for me, especially the past few years. Writing out of that energy. Here is one of my sonnets. It's sort of a loose translation of Shakespeare's Sonnet 18, and it's Sonnet 18. What do you think about becoming summer? No? You're even better, more balmy. Those crazy storms do shake spears, buds, and global hot mouth's contract runs out as we speak. Nowadays, the sun's a time bomb cinder in my eye. Too many things we find the foundation rubbed out. As every equality swirls down the dreamer by chance operation or cell mutation uncut. Hell no, you'll never be less hot to me than that. You'll never lose your sudden shimmer aura. Death won't invite you to a shady party. All this radical divinity will resemble us. So long as we're not flooded out the house. So long, this poem makes every baby out. And this is a poem for my kid. Gender kind, I dressed you up in yellow. The day after you were born, I wrapped you in yellow, a hand knit scarf swaddled in yellow to confound the question, boy or girl, as the first and foremost. It was cold December. Your grandfather brought me a handmade drive-by omelet, yellow with butter and red wine to fortify all the blood I'd lost. Cross Creek appeared on the hospital movie channel. Wrapped in yellow scarf, you saw the world for the first time. It was 12th Street. Today you say again, you must turn away from girl and how cute is an insult. Reassignment of ley lines singing, trace and redraw their power within a gender expansive hour. Back a few years ago in Carolina, Dot gave her red-haired nephew, now niece, a purse for Christmas. Who the world thought was he was really she, and that was her way of saying, I accept you, I love you. In the caroling poems of our minds, let's decide once and for all to be kind. The next one is a piece I wrote for a project I did with Q Lee. Thank you. Q Lee's book called Queen's English with a Z, Queen's English. We were working with the various 169 languages of Queens, New York, all the variousness of Englishes present in our realms. And also, I was in England, so we were thinking about that. So it's a new book coming out from Roof Books, Queen's English, MP3, I think it's called. Voices from the Queen's Head. Crash landing into all English languages, I ask you, how closely do we hold the Queen part to us? And is the Queen's head really the Queen's? How about the angle of her neck and one hand waving? That eyelash is made of what part of land? The Queen herself is as vast as the coastline. Venus is the Queen of love and the most powerful piece in chess. To make flirtatious address to someone is queening, engendering all that's English like an English finish, which has a hard, even, unpolished surface. Let's throw out that cut glass accent or add it via the multilingual shuttlecock of the east wind, sailing beyond the curvature of the Queen's earth, this globe of some kind of vernacular risk. Anyone you talk to in our world burrow has bodies of language in connection, same soundishly imagining what it is we might be saying. Truly I say to y'all, all loading gain into language is the wild menu of English's seamount flying over the Marianas Trench of knowing that this language / non-language binary is false. All the members of the body of speakers reproduce all elemental tongues in the Queen's book. The Queen's bolt holds up the roof arch overgrown with queen fern while we eat those queen fritters with the consort of Queen Anne's lace, petting a queen cat of a fancy breed who has many kittens. The Queen of the Water controls Queen Anne Green, which is a tea room. Queening as in beekeeping, a queen leg is a derrick and a queenlet is a petty queen. The Queen of the Night is the moon and the Queen of the May is me. We're all queens with invisible kingdoms reunited with others in firecracker communication, extralingual and otherwise. The whole thing expands out like a linguistic high pressure system alongside everything, always biting on our many tongues. It's been the Queen's English for quite a long time, hasn't it? Some say, oh, it's just posh. But I think the feminine aspect of its proliferation is on the rise. I wish I knew what to tell you about the future of English. I just know that it will continue, multi-tentacled and waving all its poetic properties over the landscape of human emotion, motives, and entwining messages in broken English, Spanglish, English, flying on the winglish, Creole pidgin, Southern accent, and Northern twang. Queen of the Meadow is a meadow sweet. Under Queen's English, the dictionary says, see, King's English, and I here read that abusing the King's English was written by Shakespeare. Once upon a time, the Queen Bee was called the King Bee before they knew any better. And right after the entries on queens comes the word queer. And I have one more. It's a new one. It's an acrostic. And it uses the sentence I read in the New Yorker yesterday about O. Henry. It was an article about O. Henry. So I tried to use the acrostic to just weave together a lot of quotes that were going through my head and thoughts I had as I, thank you, as I prepared for this day. So also acrostic is a sort of subversion. And the sentence I'm working with is, the story writer begins with an idea about what readers will feel when they finish reading, just as a lyric poet starts with a nonverbal state of mind and then constructs a verbal artifact that evokes it. From the New Yorker. Short stories of O. Henry, balanced story and wordplay tied with a neat bow knot. A writer must weave both sound and sense, but begins with language as thread. My dream with poetry is that it weaves words I encounter in an everyday situation to elevate sound pattern, to expand the idea of who can afford to improvise. But it's actually about who can afford not to, weaving a ragged warp on what weft we have, incoming as daily listeners, speakers, readers, and writers, the art of living our life gift. I honor the empty center, which seeds my will from a lotus pot of language to feel their way into being an Alabama beauty, digging some red clay with a crash in the first forest from Sun Ra's last earthly arc. They know not if it be animal or branch. I choose a form in order to have something to finish. I'm on the move, outrageously reading and stretching a literary man's comfort zones. Just past Eno River or music, I hauled all of my belongings along as an uncontained pod, a gathering of miscellaneous stuff from which is born lyric, totally random, but then I, as poet, sit down and go forward from a sound which starts to grow vines around idea or thought, and encounter with the way words make a meaning or meaning, both verbal and non-verbal state of what to do when the battery dies. You see the signs of it. Will you ignore, adapt, or find a way to sing your mind in a spiral inwards like red roots to river, or outwards and around like rays of a sun? Then and only then can we join our dream. Constructs tell us about our lives as living art, art as life, as language. It's with the verbal, written or spoken, that we make poesis. Moving, artifact, not static. The words move up our bodies from the book to be spliced and sung. That those are the pieces of our growing practice that evoke, not revoke, the lines drawn down. Sing it in a room with each other. That's it.
Thank you so much, Leanne. That was just a perfect way to end it with our each other. And thank you also for all those wonderful Queens and evoking the fact that Queens has so many languages. It's just such a multiplicitous space. Just wanted to thank everyone for being here, and particularly Leanne and Anne and Lucia. Just a wonderful conversation, gave us all so much to think about. And I also wanted to thank Malvika and Nick, and of course, Fong, for creating this space that's the Brooklyn Rail and giving us this space to come together. And I think now you're going to open things up, Malvika, and just let people say goodbye.
Yeah,
Thank you,
sure.
Cole. Thank you, Cole, for being
Well,
such
thank you all.
a curator and
Thank
such a
you.
good translator.
I have to scoot, but see you all next month on the 12th of August for New Directions. Okay, thanks so much.
Thanks, Cole.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Cool.
you.
Thanks,
Bye.
Lucia
Thank
and
you all.
Leanne. Thanks, Cole.
Thank you.
Lucy,
Thanks,
incredible,
everyone.
and
That was great.
brilliant.
Thanks everybody for coming.
Thank you all,
everyone.
the
Thank you for
friends
the
and all